All right, hey everybody. Hope class went okay today, and we're just gonna kind of continue with what we're doing with this PowerPoint. This is about where we left off, or where you left off today in the video, or where I left off last night. We're gonna keep trucking along. We're getting ready to transition from some of the prenatal and newborn stuff on into actually what happens as we start growing up and some of the new things we do as we get older and things we can do, things we can't quite do yet. We'll get into a whole bunch of stuff. So uh, enjoy the ride. Here we go. The last thing we talked about was how newborns, when they prefer to look at objects or they prefer to look at things that resemble a human face. So as we talked about that yesterday, so I'm not going to get a whole lot into it. But the next thing I want to discuss is habituation, and this is a term you will need to know. And essentially, what happens is, and I think you all have seen this. Let's say you give a baby a set of those plastic keys, or just a set of keys, and you jingle them, and they stare at them and look at them and grab for them. Well, what habituation says is that as you repeat that stimulation, as whether it's the keys or whether it's a picture, whether it's a mobile, things like that, as you keep doing that, the response from the newborn begins to decrease or begins to happen less. So they look at it. The more they see it or the more you introduce that stimulation, over time, they become less responsive to it. So they'll look at it at a short period of time. And that's what this graph represents. Every time you present something to a newborn or a very, very young infant, the first time you present it, and this is generally speaking, look time decreases with each presentation. So you give them a shape to look at, they'll look at it for 40 seconds. The second time you give it, it's over half. They spend over half the time looking at it. The third time, it drops even more. Fourth time, drops. Eighth time, they hardly spend any time looking at it. They have become habituated to seeing that stimulation. And that's essentially what that is. So just make sure you know habituation and how how kids or babies, as you introduce something to them, the more they look at it, the more times they look at it, the less time they look at it, if that makes sense.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
Oh my girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby.
This has to be hard.
The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay.
That has to be hard.
I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good,
Anyways, I want to show you all that. I hope that doesn't get me popped for copyright. I don't know where that video came from. But anyways, big difference when you're talking. That kind of leads us into, how much do babies interact, and at what point do babies start interacting with their environment, and especially their mother. So as we kind of continue to talk about habituation, having habituated to the old stimulus, newborns prefer gazing at new ones. So let's say you show a baby those little plastic keys, and they looked at it a bunch of times, and then all of a sudden you show them plastic keys and a mobile or a picture. All right, babies will have a tendency, they'll look at the new stimulus a whole lot more than they'll look at the familiar one. Babies only 3 months old can learn that kicking moves a mobile, and can retain that learning for over a month. So they learn, wow, if I do this, those blocks move, and I want to watch that move. So, that's at 3 months old. All right. Even this looks like a little monkey. Watch the monkey mirror the person here. It's creepy. We've talked a little bit about this experiment when we were talking about conception, not conception. Sorry, no, we weren't talking about. We were talking about perception and what we can and can't perceive, and at what old. And so you've seen this experiment before. We're going to go over it just a little bit to see how it fits into babies and perceptual development. Babies are always perceiving what is in their world and the world around themselves. So they're always looking. They're always seeing what's there. We've seen the drop-off experiment before, where you had a pattern on a table, and then you had that same pattern on the floor, and then you had a glass. And remember, there's kids, I think it was young as 6 months old, know not to walk or crawl out onto that plate glass because they can perceive that depth perception. So, anyways, we get into, as we mature, biological growth processes that enable orderly changes in behavior relatively uninfluenced by experience. So a lot of our maturation doesn't have much to do with experience. It has much more to do with just our biological growth. And truth be told, I see this in softball. We'll have a group of 7th grade girls make the team. They're obviously they're not as skilled as my juniors and seniors. But what I've noticed is that when they come back to 8th grade, they may or may not have had a lot more experience between the end of the last season and beginning of this season. But what I have noticed is that they've matured not only physically but also in their skill level. I've noticed that just within the past week with some of my 8th graders now. How much better they've gotten just in the past 6-8 months since last season. So it's just been kind of interesting to watch. To a certain extent, we all mature similarly, but at the same time, it can vary dependent on the person. I think this kind of makes sense. We know some people mature same process. With motor development, motor meaning your dexterity and your motor skills, sequence is the same again, but once again, timing varies. Usually, what happens is that kids or babies will first learn to roll over, and then they'll learn to sit up without help. Then they learn to crawl. Then they learn to walk. Then they learn to run. So that's all pretty much the same. I don't know anything about that dancing. I think babies that look like that. Those things are creepy. All right, now walking in the U.S., and we all know people who don't fit within these, but in the United States, 25% of all kids are walking by 11 months old. 50% are walking within 12 months old, their first birthday. So that's about half. And then 90% are walking by 15 months. So you can kind of see there is a little bit of spread there but there's a lot that gain it in that 11th and 12th month. Almost a quarter of your population in 1 month has learned this. And then within the next 3 months, another 40%. So you're up to 90% who are walking. Tatum was pretty much right on track with this. Zeke was way early. Zeke was walking by like 9.5 months. I think a lot of that had to do, he was chasing his sister around, but that doesn't mean anything other than he was a little earlier. Now, I will say this. Notice this up here was cached in the U.S. Now, babies in other places may develop, the timeline may be somewhat different. If a culture emphasizes walking, then babies can walk at younger ages. And this is the first time I've kind of mentioned this. But some people mention it right off the bat. We're a couple lectures in. But in this unit, we talk a lot. We really look at the whole nature versus nurture. Because that, where you fall on that line or on that continuum can really influence on how you view a lot of human development. And here's an example of this. Identical twins tend to learn to walk on the same day. That is nature. So which is it? Is it one? Is it the other? Is it both? Okay, and we're going to ask that a lot. Is this nature or is this nurture? So infants, more childhood physical development, nature versus nurture debate continues. Nurture. Again, U.S. babies walk somewhere around 11 to 15 months, but Ugandan babies all walk by 10 months. Why? Because that culture, you walk everywhere. U.S. babies spend a lot of time in the crib, whereas Ugandan babies experience more intimate and rhythmic contact. They're always on the move. Mothers are always holding on to their kids. In Uganda, because if you don't, they'll get eaten by hyenas or whatever. I don't know what's in what. I don't know if there are hyenas in Uganda or not, but the idea is in the U.S. the way our culture is set up. The kids have their own rooms. My kids, neither one of them never slept in mine or Kara's room. Or our room. They always stayed in their own rooms. Of course, we had baby monitors and we check on them, but they stayed in their own rooms and they stayed in their crib. That's not always the case in a lot of other countries, a lot of other cultures, and so that creates a different nurture. But on the nature side of it, identical twins again begin walking almost the same day. There's rapid development of the cerebellum that makes us ready to walk around age 1. So that's the cerebellum area, and experiences has a very limited effect before that time. So again, nature versus nurture, it falls somewhere on that continuum. And this is also true for bladder and bowel movements. And this is kind of interesting. I do want to discuss this a little bit. Potty training. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, Piaget is next. I want to talk about potty training for a second because, and I wish I probably knew this a little more when my kids was at that stage, but you can potty train and potty train and potty train, but until the kid has the physical ability to hold it, all right, to control the bladder and control his bowel, physically able, it doesn't matter if they want to or not. Karen and I got frustrated with Tatum because she seemed to be taking a little bit longer, or Kara would sometimes think that Tatum was doing things on purpose. And, at the time I wasn't sure. Now I kind of wonder if maybe we were pushing her too early. Because if you can't hold it, if you don't have the physical ability to hold it, then you can't hold it. It doesn't matter if you want to or not. So it's important probably to not start potty training until they're ready, until they can physically hold on to it. And then once they can get that spot, then you start your potty training. So we're going to move on to cognitive development. Of course, cognition, all that stuff. We're going to talk a lot about Piaget. What I may do is save that for tomorrow in class, because we're going to spend some time on Piaget. So, yeah, I think I'm going to call this one quits. It's kind of a short one. So, but I wanted to at least finish that up so we can kind of keep Piaget sort of clumped together. Hopefully we will see you tomorrow. Don't forget, get your experiments in ASAP and get your assignment that was posted last week on Google Classroom. Make sure that gets done as well. So hope you all are having a good evening, and peace out.